This is the Pixel 6 Pro, and it's the first proper flagship phone from Google in 2 whole years. And as someone who really loved Google's older flagship offerings, it would be understating it to say that I was super excited for the release of this phone. Now, I've always found that Google phones perform their best after they've had some serious time to learn their users' habits. I'm not talking a few days or even a couple of weeks. I find that they really crank into gear about a month or so after you start using them. And so after constant DMs and comments asking me when I'd be reviewing this phone, we're finally here, one whole month after I put my SIM into this thing, and to put it simply, I've got some thoughts. We'll start with the design, because without question, this is the most distinguishing feature of this new Pixel 6 lineup. Right up to the Pixel 5, all of Google's phones just felt like simple iterations over the previous year's models, and more often than not, they all left a little to be desired. Whether it be huge bezels or bathtub-shaped notches, there was always some sort of controversy in regards to the look of Pixel phones. And so with the Pixel 6 Pro, it feels as though Google have finally put out a phone that, in terms of design, they can be really proud of. We've got super slim bezels all the way around the front of the screen, a fairly small center hole punch for the selfie camera, and then on the back we have straight glass. But the real talking point is that camera unit, and honestly, I really like it. Not only does it make the phone look unique, but it has the added benefit of preventing side-to-side wobble whenever the phone is laying flat on a table. So without question, this is Google's most premium feeling phone yet. However, there are 2 gripes that I have with the design. Firstly, this thing is huge. No joke, it struggles to fit in the pockets of a lot of the pants I own, which is actually really annoying. And I know some people love a huge phone, but I think Google could have done really well to release a smaller variant of this phone. Yes, they have the regular Pixel 6, but it's pretty much the same size as the 6 Pro, so not really that much more pocketable. And there are other drawbacks of that phone compared to this Pro variant. What I would have loved is a smaller Pro version of this phone with all of the same specs and hardware, save for, of course, a smaller battery to bring the overall size down. But then the second issue I have with the design is this glossy back. I've lost count at how many times I've complained about this in past reviews of other phones, and so I was a bit bummed that they didn't at least release one color variant that had a matte finish on the back. I actually tweeted about this a little while ago, and believe it or not, Dbrand actually saw my tweet and offered to partner up for this video to save the day. So now, instead of having that glossy finish on the back, which I really didn't like, I'm now rocking this Super Stellar Panda-esque combo, which involves a black leather skin for the top portion of the phone and a white marble skin for the bottom. And not only does this make the phone feel incredible, but it takes the look of the phone to a whole nother level as well. Seriously, I have fallen in love with how this skin combo looks on my 6 Pro, and because of the matte finish, I'm now just that little less worried the phone is gonna slip out of my pocket or off the couch, which it has actually done a few times in the past. If you want to pick up your own set of skins from Dbrand, check out the first link down in the description below, or head to dbrand.com/Sam Beckman. Okay, real quick, I do want to give praise to Google for getting their haptics back to flagship quality with the 6 Pro after pretty lackluster haptics on the Pixel 5 last year. Now, whilst they've probably reclaimed their spot at the top of the Android pile in terms of haptics, I will say they're still not quite as good as the haptics we had on the Pixel 4 lineup. These ones feel just a little more in your face compared to the really subtle and tactile haptics we had on those Pixel 4 flagship phones, but that aside, they're still really great haptics, which is much appreciated. Aside from that, the speakers are really solid, definitely on par with other speaker systems on high-end Android phones, and that fingerprint sensor, well, yeah, it's just as bad as what's already been reported. It's just that little bit slower and less reliable compared to what I'm used to, and for some weird reason, it also disappears whenever I tap a notification on my lock screen, essentially forcing me to input my PAN. That's really annoying. Now, I did actually receive a rare mid-month software patch during the process of making this video, which reportedly was meant to improve the performance of the fingerprint sensor, and I guess maybe it did a bit, but it's still perhaps one of the weaker points of this phone, particularly when you compare it to the competition. And so then we turn to the display, and for the first time we have a 120Hz panel on a Google phone, and when you pair that with the fact that it's also a Quad HD panel, what you end up with is a really solid display. It does get noticeably brighter than older Pixel displays as well, which is much appreciated. Though I will say it's still definitely not as bright as the iPhone 13 lineup or Samsung's top-end flagships. Oh, and for some reason, the adaptive brightness seems to be a little finicky on this phone. Sometimes it takes too long to brighten up, and other times it takes too long to dial itself down. And so whilst it's not a huge issue, hopefully a future software patch will make this a little more reliable. That said, I do really appreciate this new extra dim setting, which you can place a toggle for in your quick settings. And when activated, this will make the display even darker than what the minimum brightness setting allows for. And this is a super underrated feature that I'm really grateful for. Lastly, in regards to display, I have noticed a few times over the past month that the display will clock itself down to 60 Hz for no apparent reason, with it staying that way until I've rebooted the phone. Again, it hasn't happened that many times, but it's still an issue that needs fixing. And so then we come to what arguably makes the Pixel phones so enticing in the first place: the software. And this year, the headline is Android 12, which brings with it a pretty radical redesign to nearly every component of the software. Whether it be this big full screen notification shade with massive buttons everywhere you look, or the redesigned search bar in the app drawer, or even the updated volume slider interface. Everything is big, in your face, and to be blunt, I don't love it. You do somewhat get used to it over time, but even on the rare occasion I've had to boot up a different Android device, I've never been that relieved to get back to using Android 12. However, there is one incredible aspect of the Pixel experience on Android 12 that has pretty much made me a convert, and that is all of these beautiful buttery animations. It's really clear Google has thought long and hard about how they can make this software experience super fluid and smooth, and it really does make a difference in the day-to-day use of this phone. Let's take a look at a few examples. So on older versions of Android, if you had the keyboard open in any given app and then swiped to enter the recents page, that keyboard would then disappear. Not a big issue, but on Android 12, the keyboard stays put no matter what, which makes navigating between apps even more seamless. What about when we've got Google Maps running some directions for us? On older versions of Android, you swipe to go home, there's this slight delay, and then the little picture-in-picture mode finally fades in. On Android 12, we have this much cleaner animation that launches from the full screen interface straight into the little picture-in-picture box. Excellent. And then there's little things like when you're in an app and you scroll to the end of the interface, there's now this bouncy animation regardless of the app. Or what about the home screen? Sure, we've still got that silly at a glance widget up the top here and this obnoxious search bar down the bottom, both of which we can't disable. Damn you, Google. But all of these icons have been set up using either Shortcut Maker or KWGT. And when I close each of them, they retain that app to icon transition animation, which is amazing. And there's 1,000 other little instances of these really cool animations and optimizations Google has implemented with Android 12. But to cut a long story short, this is by far the smoothest experience you will ever get on an Android phone right now. It'll be interesting to see how many of these changes, if any, get ported over to other manufacturers' versions of Android 12, because my fear is that they'll all be focused on bringing over this whole Material You auto-theming functionality, which, to be honest, I don't really care for. But whilst we're talking about how fantastic all of these new animations are, let's chat about performance. And whilst initially there were some concerns about this new in-house Tensor chip underperforming against the Snapdragon flagship chipsets, in my experience, that's not been the case. This phone feels as fast and smooth as every other Android flagship phone I've tested this year. Sure, it's been a little bit buggy, like on the odd occasion where the keyboard just stops mid-sentence when I'm typing and then quickly catches up a second or two later, but these bugs are all software issues more than anything else, and things have definitely settled in over the last couple of weeks. And speaking of things settling in over the past couple of weeks, how about battery life? So firstly, Google phones do not perform well in regards to battery life in the first week or two of use. They have this feature called adaptive battery, and it learns your usage habits over an extended period of time to determine how to best optimize your phone's battery life whilst also ensuring performance remains top tier. And so yes, the battery life has gotten a lot better compared to when I first started using the device, but is it iPhone 13 Pro level? Absolutely not. I'd say this phone has pretty run-of-the-mill battery life as far as Android flagships go, but it's certainly not the worst, particularly after a few weeks of use. And so finally, we have the cameras. And for the first time in a very long time, we finally have new sensors all around for each of the lenses on this phone. Now, I did a pretty in-depth camera comparison with the Pixel 6 Pro and iPhone 13 Pro not too long ago that goes into a lot more detail than what I'm gonna cover in this video. So I'll link that up in the cards, but here's a quick summary of my findings. Video has seen some much needed improvements over previous Pixel phones, though it's still not iPhone level. But in regards to photography, when using the main or telephoto lenses for daytime shots, this phone is one of the best. The results are consistently sharp with really impressive dynamic range, and the images just look very pleasing. The new motion toggles, action pan, and long exposure are also pretty fun and can yield some cool results. And Magic Eraser is definitely one of those jaw-dropping features for anyone watching it happen in real time. The issues for me with this camera system are portrait images and the ultra-wide lens. Up until around the Pixel 4, Google was, in my subjective opinion, the best in terms of how it processed portrait images, and it had pretty much nailed things like edge detection and general image processing. But this year, it's like their impressive software processing just can't keep up with those upgraded sensors. And as a result, edge detection has become really inconsistent. And that ultra-wide lens is hardly really an ultra-wide lens. For one, it's a lot tighter compared to really any other ultra-wide lens found on the market, and it's a heck of a lot softer than the main or telephoto lenses as well. Don't get me wrong, it's great that it's there, but it's certainly one of the weaker points of this camera system. And so here's my final takeaway in regards to the cameras on the Pixel 6 Pro. Yes, they will often wow you and shock you more than what other phones will do with their camera systems, but you'll often find yourself a little bit underwhelmed as well. In other words, it's not a super reliable camera system, and I'm not nearly as confident in its performance compared to how I was with past Pixel devices. And so after a month of using the Pixel 6 Pro as my everyday device, overall, I'm impressed. I've heard others say that even though this is technically Google's 6th flagship device, this phone actually feels like version 1 of a brand new lineup, and I have to agree with that sentiment. We have a completely new build, new camera sensors, a new under-display fingerprint sensor, and more than anything, a new chipset. It's like Google has done a complete reset on their phone lineup, and as a result, there are going to be some teething issues like with any first generation product. But the fact that we're already at this level of quality with the 6 Pro fills me with absolute confidence that future iterations of this phone are really going to start blowing things wide open. If I was Samsung or Xiaomi or anyone else, I'd be a little concerned. There's only two small things that might push me back to using a different phone before the end of the year, and they are the hefty size of this phone and also the limiting home screen launcher that makes customization a hot mess. Now, straight after this video is finished, I'm moving my SIM from this device into the regular Pixel 6. So if you want to see my thoughts on that phone, then make sure you subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on. But either way, Google, well done with the Pixel 6 Pro, but now get back to working on improving the next version.